I want to move over to the war itself. Russia launched an overwhelming, massive attack on the energy grid of Ukraine.
Several of them over the last week, right?
As a direct
huge
response.
Drone and missile attacks, repeated, bam, 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 bam.
I mean, it's been several different cities that they've been hitting and hammering for the last week. And all of this is in response to Ukraine going after Russia's energy grid. I mean, they were bragging about it. It was like, oh,
yeah,
Moscow is going to sleep in
it certainly presents them with a public justification for doing so. Whether or not Russia would have done so without them doing it is another question entirely.
Do you think they would have? I mean, because it didn't seem like they were hammering on the energy grid.
What are we talking about? We've seen several before regime attempts on oil refineries that got wider public press. Russia was already setting records of new large drone attacks, right? Several times, 500, 600, 700, right? So, yes, I think they probably would have. Maybe there was a little bit extra thrown in now because of this, but I'm not so sure that this is some type. It plays very well to present it that way, and if you need to present for domestic political reasons and so deterrence reasons a response, if you already have one plan that you were going to do anyway, and you throw in a few extra things and slap "this is in response" on top of it, that's all well and good. It's part of. They're at war. I mean, come on.
I know, but this seems specific to putting them in blackouts, and not to mention going after trains and everything.
Okay, yes, there is a question that Russia has not pursued the Kiev regime's energy infrastructure over the last half a year the way. But then again, there is also the point that Russia quite often, as things are moving towards the winter, has accelerated their attacks on the Kiev regime's energy infrastructure. Again, not necessarily to completely knock it out, but to stress things going into the winter season, right? Russia has done that before. So it could be that is the reason, and it could not be. I can't say for sure. And I can't say that these attacks would not have happened if the Kiev regime had not been, pinging a few Russian oil refineries. All I will say on that issue is Bloomberg reported last week that Russia's has again peaked in oil exports. So, part of the argument they presented there was, well, Russia temporarily, until repairs were made, which have already happened, had slightly less refining capacity. So they just shipped more crude oil to be shipped overseas. So you may temporarily cause a lesser supply of gasoline, right? But on macroeconomic terms, Russia is still making that money. It's just selling it as crude rather. And again, ultimately, right? Let's say they do what they do not have the ability to do right now, which is significantly affect Russia's oil export capacity. How is that going to play out for them? Because it's just going to raise the price of oil globally. They're still getting Russian energy, as everyone admits. It just laundered through India and Turkey. Even Ukraine is getting energy from India, which is ultimately Russian energy, right? Yes. So they're going to be paying more, and Russia will be selling less, but they'll be making more on what they're selling because the global price of oil, the market price, will be increasing. This has been the logical fault in this whole strategy from the beginning of the conflict. Russia is too important in energy and other commodity supplier to the global markets to cut out of it. You are just going to raise costs for yourself, and ultimately Russia will still make bank. It's a failed military economic strategy. And this is the situation as well. Now, Russia's strikes have been, again, they focused more on trains and military logistics than they have. I mean, they have been hitting them, right? But to a much higher degree over the last week. Then the attacks on energy infrastructure, and apparently a reply back to a power station that was supplying power lines to the long cooled down reactors in Chernobyl in response to Kiev regime's shelling of these lines that provide cooling water power to the shut down reactors in Zaporozhye, right? A tit for tat, which Putin talked about openly. You have nuclear reactors too, right? So that was significant, I think. That was something I wouldn't have necessarily expected.
Him owning it, basically saying, look, both of us can do them.
Yeah. So big against their energy infrastructure. Again, maybe this is the beginning of a seasonal campaign. Maybe it was a reply back and a one-off. We'll have to see going forward. And also big, huge hits on the Kiev regime's military industrial, including a brand new facility that was open just across the Polish border in Lvov that was trying to hide big military industrial facilities and warehouses within a big commercial park, commercial industrial park as well, the Sparrow Park, as the English is, and they hit that in a major way, and you can see the pictures of the enormous fires going off. And I won't say that they don't manage to sneak anything by Russia, but they obviously they had a video proclaiming its opening last week. I mean, they were just asking for it, as far as I'm concerned. Anyway, they're going to have some problems with the opening of those facilities, needless to say. After, again, enormous drone and missile strikes by Russia, you can definitely say they have been notching things up a notch again and again and again over the last few months. But last week, they notched them up 2 or 3 notches.
They've also been taking more territory as this war has been going on. I think they took like 3 villages yesterday. I'm curious on your take on this. I mean, obviously, the Russian military is moving. They seem to be moving faster than what they were doing before. The Ukrainian military, Zelensky just put out a video effectively screaming uncle, saying we should have a ceasefire.
An aerial ceasefire. Right. A week ago, he was yelling about hitting the Kremlin, hitting Moscow, blacking out Moscow, hitting the Kremlin, and tomahawks and everything this week. And then a week later, after those up 2-notch airstrikes across the board in Ukraine, he's there. We need an aerial ceasefire. Trump needs to make this happen. It's the only thing that will bring peace. Yeah, he's such a clown. He's such a clown.
Yeah. So, from your point of view, does this still take another year and a half? I always have to ask this question just to check in because things change.
Yeah,
but
I can't make a prediction of the end of this conflict. And again, in one form or another, right? Whether we're talking conflict, frozen conflict, guerrilla war, like I've said from the beginning of this conflict, I really do not believe that in any type of permanent sense, Ukraine will see peace for the rest of my life, which is why I said in February of 2022 for forever war in that particular context. But I do not see an end to this conflict in a year into the future, and beyond that, it's kind of pointless to speculate. The war will continue for another year.
Putin did make a point though about a buffer zone, and if he's talking about a buffer zone, does that indicate that he is talking about we're going to a certain point, we're creating a buffer zone, and we're going to call it a day? Or he doesn't mean it in that sense?
They've bring this up before, and buffer zones have a way of, I think, depending on the situation. Look, when Russia takes all of Donbass, right, which will happen sometime next year, right? Hopefully in the first half of the year. At the beginning of I think I'm definitely the most cautious and perhaps, maybe people would say pessimistic in my predictions. And I predicted that by the end of this year, that Russia would have taken or all but taken all of Donbass, right? That they would finish out the autumn with Slavyansk and Kramatorsk and Konstantinovka. And that is 6 months too optimistic, right? Now, it's already been clear for about 2 months now, but I was too optimistic and everyone else was far too optimistic, right? It's still a long, bloody, grinding slog on the ground, right? Putin talking about trickling advances and saying, well, their advances, it's just, the technological, fighting all of NATO, that's what it comes to, to limit our own casualties to what the Kremlin considers an acceptable level. But now Slavyansk, Kramatorsk is in 6 months, into next year. So that still shows. And after that happens, again, Russia will turn to Kiev and turn to the West and say, we have now achieved this goal. Are you done yet? Have you seen sense? And if not, they'll begin moving for Zaporozhye city and Kherson city and taking these things that they've already claimed and had hoped to achieve through settlement rather than having to take them militarily. At the same time, they'll be moving deep into Dnipropetrovsk. They'll be moving, encircling Kharkov. And these sorts of things will all be happening in the second half of next year. And again, they will turn to the West and say, are you done? Right? Can we now, sit? The terms have gotten harder, as we said it would. But are you done yet? And when they say no, then Russia will continue, if presuming they say no, and I do presume they will say no. But hey, we can always hope, I guess. That they will see sense and so forth. I don't believe they will, but I would be happy to be proven wrong on that regard. They'll move on to the next step then, and then the step after that will be crossing the Dnieper and probably another move on Kiev, and that will probably be late 2026, 2027.
Oh, Jesus. I was reading, I think it was Simplicus the Thinker. He was talking about this kind of change in warfare, where when Putin is talking about a trickle, he really means a trickle, like 2 or 3 man teams that are effectively moving through because of the way.
Said that on this channel before, yeah.
Yeah, I mean it's kind of hard to wrap my head around. Like
it's 2 or 3 because of the modern nature of drone warfare.
That is just not safe.
Both sides, where they have the urban facilities to do it, have enormous drone screens, FPV drone screens, right? Russia, of course, has artillery and other, type of things weighing in on that create kill zones in front of their forces. And, then there becomes a joint kill zone where basically nothing can survive in between the two forces. And there is always in this conflict, at the actual contact line, been considerably less forces involved in actual encounter battles than a lot of people think, right? The majority of forces are falling back. And that is because we live in a world of 24/7 satellite and drone reconnaissance and extremely precise long-range precision strikes that prevent you from forming a critical mass of troops on either side that are necessary to punch through and exploit situations. So the strategy has long been on both sides. This was actually the strategy that the Kiev regime shifted to late in the day in their failed 2023 offensive. After they gave up on the Pentagon's combined arms maneuver Jedi warfare, Zelensky switched to this. But the Russian defenses were too well manned, too well, 5 layers deep, too well manned, right? Small teams trying to infiltrate the lines. But Russia is able to make this tactic work now because the Kiev regime, the contact line, they keep stretching it out, right? Expanding it. The Kiev regime has such a shortage of forces. They themselves admit it. We don't have enough, not my propaganda. Their own commanders talk about it all the time, that they don't have enough troops to man, and there are large areas of the front line, without people manning them, right? And so Russian forces are able to slip through those FPV, small enough groups to be, have a better chance of not being identified, slipping through the lines, and then forming a critical mass on the other side of those defensive lines where they're not necessarily, they're beyond or inside the space of that kill zone. And that's the tactic that Russia, the infiltration tactic, it's been referred to, or Putin talked about it, trickling. This has been going for months now. In fact, there was, again, something that has been pointed out previously, but punched home again this week. Russia's using practically no tanks at the front line.
Yeah.
Even vastly decreased levels of infantry fighting vehicles. Why? Because they immediately become fodder for FPV drones that, if they can't destroy them, can then take them out and then immobilize them in repeated strikes. So why waste them when the infiltration works better? It's slow, right? But it's, as Putin said, an advance is an advance. It's the nature of warfare now, right? You put out a big mass of tanks and infantry fighting vehicles, you assemble them together to punch through defensive lines. They're going to be spotted by U.S. satellites and drones and everything else, and then there'll be a swarm of drones, and there'll be incoming multiple launch rocket system strikes, HIMARS, and everything else on them in a second, right? It makes it very hard to do. It's just the nature of modern warfare. Because the sides, even with all the advantages Russia has, the Kiev regime is still in the same ballpark. They're still playing with a lot of the same capabilities, even if at a radically reduced quantity and in some cases quality. They're still in the same ballpark. It is not the U.S. beating up on Iraq, right? This is all of NATO forming their logistical operation and strategic rear against Russia. And the two sides are, again, for all of Russia's advantages in this conflict, logistically and otherwise, it's still close enough that with the modern technological advances, the drone warfare and electronic warfare and everything else, this is what we're reduced to. Small and 2-man, 3-man squads sneaking through kill zones and then forming critical masses on the other side of poorly manned defensive lines.
Wow.
But it's working, right? It's
working.
It's not fast enough to satisfy that gut instinct for seeing your enemy smashed and faster, right? It's really hard from a Western supportive, armchair quarterback standpoint to say, why aren't we going faster? We know we have advantage, this advantage and that advantage and everything else. Why is Putin holding back? It's really not. Right? Not without an unacceptable level of casualties. It's just the nature of modern warfare and the matchup between NATO-backed Ukraine and Russia.
Wow. I was fascinated by that, by the way. When I read that, it was like 2 to 3 man teams.
He's actually mentioned that before, but it's receiving wider attention now. But what other world leader can talk about what's, on the other side can talk honestly about what's happening on the contact line? And when he talks ATACMS and Tomahawks, he's like, yeah, they hit us, they hurt us, right? We adapted and we'll adapt again. But they'll damage us a bit in the process, but ultimately it's not going to change the strategic level calculus on the battlefield.
Mark Sleboda, best in the business. Mark Sleboda, International Relations Security Analyst. You can find Mark on Boosty, Boosty. Look up Realpolitik with Mark Sleboda, or just put in Mark Sleboda. He will appear. Mark, thank you for this, man. Check him out, by the way. Check out his location. Check out the Boosty thing. I always get your updates when you send those out. Much appreciated for it. Definitely give Mark a look. He's, like I said, when I said best in the business, I mean it. You be safe, Mark. Have a good day, man. Be safe.
Thanks for having me.
Bye-bye. All right. Great update as normal by Mark